Thank you so much for having me. It's really great to see a full room of faces and people who are excited to engage in a conversation about Chinatown and also about the rapid changes that are currently happening. I am a woman of color, an Asian American. I'm a third-generation Chinese American and a granddaughter and daughter of my family's long legacy in New York City's Chinatown. I'm the fifth-generation owner of my family's 92-year-old porcelain shop, W.O.W Co. Currently, I'm working to regenerate the shop as well as run our community initiative, the W.O.W Project, which is working to reclaim ownership over Chinatown's future by regenerating, encouraging, and protecting Chinatown's creative culture through arts and activism. So how did I arrive here? In the winter of 2015, my family's shop and business building came to a pivotal moment. W.O.W Co was on the brink of sale. This place that meant so much to me and grounded me in who I was and had always been both a launching and landing pad was on the brink of erasure. W.O.W started in 1890 by my great-great-grandfather, Walter Ng. And that was just 8 years after America passed the Chinese Exclusion Act, which barred Chinese immigrants from immigrating to America. So you can imagine at that time how hard it was to settle and create community. And at the time, in the 1890s, that's when Chinatowns were beginning. And Chinese immigrants were forced to live in these neighborhoods because they were safe spaces. This was the only way they had access to goods, access to services. And W.O.W was located in the main thoroughfare of Chinatown at the time. And my great-great-grandfather was selling canned goods, he was selling herbs, some porcelain, and tastes of home like dried fish. We also acted as an informal postage service for the Chinese immigrant community to send mail to their relatives in China. So W.O.W was also this community hub. It was not only a general store, but people convened there. People went there to socialize, to convene and see their friends and get the latest gossip on what was happening in the neighborhood. For me, the shop has always meant a lot to me because I was able to spend a lot of time with my grandparents. My grandfather, who's on the right, since the age of 6, taught me Chinese poetry in the back office of the shop. And every day my grandmother would be cooking afternoon snacks in the back kitchen every day after school. On the weekends, I would hang out with my sister, my cousins, and we would play hide and seek behind porcelain. We would dance in the front of the shop to my grandma singing. In high school, I practiced my tap dance routines because that was the only hardwood floor I had access to in the back of the shop. And I also practiced for tuba recitals because my family wouldn't let me play in the apartment because it was too loud. So I really rooted myself and found who I was here at the shop. And the people who make up the shop really allowed me to harness this sense of belonging and sense of community in Chinatown. Fast forward to winter of 2015, at the same time that W.O.W was on the brink of sale, I met a PhD student, Diane Wong, who you see here. She was starting her fieldwork for her dissertation on the gentrifications of Chinatowns throughout the US. And she walked into the shop very serendipitously and was interested in conducting oral history interviews with both me and my dad to learn more about how we were running our business throughout the years, through 9/11, through Hurricane Sandy. She wanted to know what was keeping our doors open. And for me at the time, it was really amazing to sit down with somebody who was a third party, who was removed from the situation, and someone I could really process and unpack my emotions around this situation of losing a place that meant so much to me. So Diane knew that I was reintegrating myself back into Chinatown after being away for 3 years. working and living abroad in China, Thailand, and Laos. And she was so generous to offer for me to shadow her on her interviews with her. So we spent the next 3 months interviewing different community stakeholders throughout New York City's Chinatown. And we spent endless hours. I mean, some interviews took up to 3 hours to unpack and listen to folks' histories, rich histories in the neighborhood. This opportunity for me to listen and learn from the people that make up my neighborhood was really powerful and transformative, because it allowed me to bring my family's situation into a larger context, to frame it against the larger issues that were happening around gentrification and displacement. It was clear that all of the stories that we were listening to, everybody we were talking to, were concerned about these rapid changes that were happening in Chinatown and that are still happening. And all of our interviews pointed to this: stop gentrification, resist, be resilient. So what does gentrification look like in Manhattan City's Chinatown? This is a photo of a new 71-story luxury condo that's going up and soon to be completed. And once it's completed, it will dwarf everything within its vicinity, as you can see. Gentrification in Chinatown has brought changes in the use of space. It has led to the overdevelopment and changes in spatial dynamics to not benefit the low-income Chinese immigrant population that resides in Chinatown currently. There are over 30 hotels in New York City's Chinatown, over 100 white box art galleries, and there are many upscale bars, boutiques, and eateries that cater to white, affluent folks that aren't the residents that make up our neighborhood. So what's happening on the other end? There's a huge narrative of community resilience. I was really inspired to be able to listen to the personal stories of resilience and resistance from those who make up my neighborhood. The Chinatown small property owner that's taking on the management of their family's building to carry on the legacy of their family. The small business owner that's continuing to open up shop every day, and tenants who are organizing and mobilizing to fight against the predatory landlords that are pervasive throughout our neighborhood. Local artists and activists who are using their skill set and their passion for art to have positive social impact in the community. So that brought me to think about what I could do to join in the resistance efforts and also contribute to my community. And for me, that meant WOW. WOW as a space, WOW as a small business, and that really required us to think about how we could reinterpret what WOW was as a small business in a time of rapid change. So at the heart of my inspiration and my motivation to act on this inspiration that I got from listening to the stories and the concerns of the people that make up my neighborhood was honoring the legacy of those who came before me. So this is a photo of my grandmother. She took over the shop in 1964. And I really love this photo because you can tell how excited she is from the glimmer in her eyes and also the determination in her face. Also on the left is a photo taken 5 years after she took over the shop in 1969. And it really represents what I've always thought about, or the images that came up in my mind when I thought about WOW. People, my family laughing, spending time together. That's my grandmother's younger sister on the left. Her name is Betty. And both of them are still working in the store. They're over 80 now, and they're my colleagues. So we started pretty small. I thought that a good way to start regenerating the space was by cleaning and doing some spring cleaning. And I started to clean the basement space and also clean all of the nook and crannies, as many as we could, to look for old artifacts, to look for objects that held the meaning and the history and the legacy of the space. So I chose this image to show you. On the left is our original sign from 1890. We found it in the old roasting pig pit in the back of the shop. My great-grandfather used to roast pigs and chicken to serve up on the weekends, and it was just stored down there. And I decided to refurbish it, oil it up, paint it, and then hang it in our storefront window as a symbol of our history and legacy, but also to say we're here to stay. We also created a small historical pamphlet to share our story. We really wanted to inspire others to think about how they can, in their own capacities, contribute to the neighborhood or contribute to their communities. For us, storytelling is a huge part of the work that we do. We are trying to uplift the stories that make up our neighborhood, but the only way that we can do that is by sharing our story first. And so this is a physical example of the way that we're doing that. We also revived silkscreen designs that I found in the basement cleaning. They were designed by my dad, and they're all Chinatown themed. So I thought that we could remake them and reprint them on tote bags, on hats, and sell them in the shop as a way to think about the ways in which we can honor cultural traditions, honor our neighborhood, but also put in some new, young energy into the space. So the W.O.W Project. It wasn't a big idea that we had going into it. Diane and I, as we were conducting these oral history interviews, we began to debrief after every single interview, talk about the themes that stuck out to us, the quotes that we really loved, and just our general reactions to the conversations that we were having. And one theme that really stood out to us was the fact that second, third generation Chinese Americans were coming back to the neighborhood and pursuing their entrepreneurial pursuits in Chinatown. They were opening up businesses that were, quote, non-traditional to Chinatown. So you can imagine ice cream shops, fixie bike shops, galleries, businesses that you would walk past and assume that weren't opened by Chinese Americans. So we wanted to break that mold. We wanted to bring the people who were behind these businesses to a community forum and have them be in conversation with the community. So we organized this panel discussion in May of 2016, so just last summer. And we really wanted to unpack this complicated narrative and this complicated role. How did these business owners see themselves in the ecosystem of gentrification? Did they see themselves as a part of it, as not a part of it? How did they kind of come to terms with that? And for us, after seeing the reception of this discussion, we were really motivated to continue to organize spaces for the community to come and be in conversation about these concerns and issues at hand. So we continued. In July of 2016, just 3 months later, we collaborated with an artist collective called the Chinatown Art Brigade, and we organized a conversation about the influx of art galleries in our neighborhood. We invited gallery owners, we invited artists, different community stakeholders, residents, to be in conversation about what it looked like for art, community, and culture to coexist in the same space and work together. Obviously, we got we didn't get a huge response from the commercial gallery owners. They completely ignored our emails. But we ended up having the owner of Chinatown Soup on our panel, as well as the curator of the Museum of Chinese in America. And it really was a conversation. And this was really the start of this conversation about galleries. The Chinatown Art Brigade has really taken this conversation to action, has made a pledge, has been in conversation with many gallery owners and artists, and trying to challenge them to think about the ethics behind renting a space, to think about what it means to enter a neighborhood. So this was really a turning point for us, because we realized how important it was to create a space like WOW that wasn't an institution, that was a small business and a staple of the community to hold these conversations. So that really made us start to think about the ways in which we could grow the WOW Project, but also think about how we could reinterpret how a small business could contribute to a community. So the pillars of the WOW Project. The first one is inspired by, as I mentioned before, my two 80-year-old colleagues. Intergenerational dialogue is huge and is a huge challenge for me and my daily work experience. And I really wanted the WOW Project to tackle this question in a way that we could bring our elders into the space and engage with them either through dialogue or through arts and culture. So the first program that we had that really spoke to this was our Cratewood Design Challenge. This was prompted by, again, the spring cleaning that we were doing in the spring of 2016. We had a bunch of old shipping crates that our porcelain inventory was shipped from Hong Kong to New York in. And we broke those down and realized how much raw material we had. And we really wanted to put out an open call to our community and ask them if they had any community design ideas. And we were really excited about what came out of it, because the people that participated were not woodworkers, they weren't artists, they were folks who were interested in contributing to the community. So as you can see in the photos, we had a skateboard that was made out of the Cratewood. We had a rickshaw mobile desk on the right. And the event was really a celebration of everyone's hard work, and also celebrating the history and the legacy that these pieces, this raw material, holds and carries. In December of 2016, Trump got elected, and we knew we wanted to put on a program that, again, spoke to intergenerational dialogue, but also celebrated the people in the margins in our community, which are women. Chinatown is founded upon a patriarchal system, and we wanted to bring in different women who built community in their own ways, in their own sectors. So we had a labor organizer, two business owners of multi-generational businesses in Chinatown, and also had an arts and cultural worker on the panel. And we were really able to uplift these voices and learn about how, in a time of need, how we could work through struggles to build community together. Our second pillar of the WOW Project is art and activism. Again, going back to the cleaning bit of the spring of 2016, that was a really important time. We cleaned out our basement studio that was once a barber shop and once my mom's pattern making studio to make clothing. And again, I returned to that question of what I could do in my capacity to join in these resistance efforts. And we came up with the idea to put out an open call for an artist residency. We really wanted to offer up one of our window displays to an emerging Asian American artist to think about the ways in which they could engage the community in creating the content that went into the window. So we collaborated with an organization called China Residencies, put out an open call, and we got our first artist in residence. Her name is Melissa Liu. And the whole impetus of her project was to challenge the cultural tradition of giving and receiving red envelopes. We really wanted to engage, again, our elders in conversation, because at the time, we were in this political moment. It was January 2017. A lot of our elders had voted for Trump, and Melissa was really interested in looking at different ways that we could engage in dialogue that we normally didn't have with our elders. So by making these red envelopes and the younger generation giving the red envelope to the older generation with a question inside, Melissa hoped that this would encourage conversations that wouldn't normally happen. So this is a photo of an oral history workshop that she conducted. She conducted them throughout January, the whole month, and recorded stories, talked about the ways in which the workshop participants could conduct oral histories with their relatives, and also made red envelopes with the participants as well. And this is what the end product looked like on the right, that window. Everything there was generated through the workshops that she held. There were banners that were made and created in different Asian languages for the Lunar New Year. There were different silk-screened Lunar New Year envelopes. The symbols on them were inspired by the stories that she was listening to. And then we had an altar that had a TV screen inside that scrolled some quotes from certain oral history stories. So we're moving into our second year of the artist residency, and we just kicked it off in October, which was last month. I can't believe it's last month. And we are really lucky to have a paper cutting artist this year who's looking to create a shadow puppet theater. And she's holding a bunch of workshops in the studio to create the set for the shadow puppet performance. She's held several workshops, one of them being one that we held as a pop-up in Columbus Park, which is a park in the community. And I think for us, what's really important in doing this work is meeting the community where they're at and not making it hard for them to come to us, because it's not about us, it's about the community. And so that's why we've been doing a lot of different activities where we're traveling, we're mobile, we're moving ourselves and our activities to public spaces where our community convenes. And as you can see, we were able to engage elders and children in making different paper cuts. This is a photo of a shadow puppet workshop that we held in the studio. So our next project that really speaks to, again, the pillar of art and activism is our new paper-making project, Resist, Recycle, Regenerate. And through this program, we're really trying to look at what it means to have a program at the intersection of social justice, art making, the exploration of personal identity and neighborhood history. We're really seeking to draw lessons from the history of racial discrimination and exclusionary policies against our Chinese immigrant population and how we can address that in our political moment today. This is a photo of our 5 participants. We're focusing on working with young women from the ages of 16 to 21. And we're in our first phase of the program right now, trying to empower them with the skills to lead community workshops where they collect the leftover confetti from Lunar New Year festivities and hold and facilitate community workshops to make paper. This is a photo of a participant pulling paper in the studio. And one of the highlights for me so far in the month and a half that we've been running this program is a Chinese immigration workshop that we held. We printed out different old and current articles about Chinese immigration and asked our participants to put together collage poems to reclaim and retell our history. And this was these are 3 examples of what came out of the workshops. So the third pillar of the W.O.W Project's mission is our internship program. It's really at the core of W.O.W's goals to empower the next generation. The W.O.W Project's internship program provides a unique opportunity for youth to really see a project through. It's project-based, so they come in, they create a project, they work alongside me, and they design and implement the project for the full entire course of the project's development and delivery. So these youth in this photo, they worked on projects spanning from starting a WOW weekly blog to producing our first ever fundraising video, to organizing and delivering their own WOW Project program, as well as managing a team of 10 volunteers to transcribe mine and Diane's oral history interviews. So we had a pretty rock star team this past year, and they were excited to work together, and they wanted to put together a culminating project, which is what you see in front of you. As I was talking about mobile, we're looking to meet the community where they're at, and we really wanted to create something that could create more access to bilingual resources for our community. So with the help of my dad, the resident woodworker, they built a mobile cart, and they collected different bilingual resources around housing justice, health. We had a Chinatown reading list up there. And we had them kind of posted on the cart, and then we pushed them in public spaces. We pushed them to Columbus Park, to Sarah D. Roosevelt, and we got a lot of interaction with folks in the community who were excited to see what we were doing. So where does this all lead us? We're doing all this work with intergenerational dialogue, with art and activism, with our interns and the younger generation. A huge question that Diane and I have been thinking about is looking at how this connects to different communities. How does what's going on in New York City's Chinatown connect to other Chinatowns across North America? And we decided to make a trip to the West Coast and connect with people in different Chinatowns who are doing similar work on the ground and are working through similar struggles. And we were lucky enough to receive a grant from the Citizens Committee to make this West Coast Solidarity Tour possible. And that was just last month in October. This was inspired by conversations that we were holding in New York City's Chinatown. Again, these oral history interviews, these generative conversations have been really the key in building momentum for us to have conversations with other folks in our community. And we've been thinking a lot about how to create more access to these stories, to these interviews. And one of the ways in which we did that was by holding a panel discussion with interviewees that we had interviewed early in 2016 and brought them all together to be in conversation about the current pressing issues in Chinatown, whether that be the influx of galleries, the rezoning plan that's about to be passed in Chinatown, the rising property taxes in Chinatown, the housing justice issues. We really wanted a mix of perspectives in the room to be able to talk through these issues. And this was held at the New York Public Library. And we found it to be really generative and a way in which people could engage with the content in which we recorded previously. We want people to know what people are concerned about, what are the issues on the table. Another way in which we experimented creating more access to these interviews was by using a interactive video experience to create a different dimension to the audio. So at our 1-year anniversary celebration, Diane presented 3 oral history interviews with 3D video with audio overlay. And that really allowed everybody in the audience to have a visual sense of what the person was talking about their storefront, about their building, about their apartment. So that was really, really powerful, and we wanted to continue to build our oral history collection and take that work with us to different communities. This is a photo of Vancouver's Chinatown. A theme that we saw throughout was the fact that all of these Chinatowns are in this is a moment. A lot of folks in these communities are reevaluating what the purpose and function Chinatowns are for. Who are Chinatowns for? And so housing justice was a huge theme, and looking at how we can preserve housing for our elders. One of the highlights for me was visiting the Chinatown Concern Group in Vancouver. It was organized by a man named King Mong, and he organized elders to come together and think about the ways in which they could organize to resist and protest and rally for their housing rights. And it was really moving to see so many radical elders who were excited to make signs, to turn out for these events so their voices could be heard. This is Mrs. Kong. She's also a member of the Chinatown Concern Group. And something that we saw throughout the tour was the fact that women are at the forefront of resistance movements against displacement. Mrs. Kong is the most outspoken member of Chinatown Concern Group. She's always speaking on behalf of the group. She's the most dedicated, committed, and she's really the ringleader. And that's how everyone in the room introduced her to us. This is just a photo of Diane and I sharing the work that we do, and really, sharing all the conversations that we've been having. We also took our work to Stanford University. We spoke to an urban studies class and gave a presentation there. And for us, it's really important for us to continue to have these conversations with youth and the younger generation, to increase awareness about the issues that are going on in Chinatown. Just by a raise of hands, who had a sense of the gentrification that is currently happening in New York City's Chinatown? Yeah, it is. And that's another point that we're trying to work on as well, is to connect our work with other communities across New York City. And that's happened a lot with the Chinatown Art Brigade, and they've been collaborating with a lot of different artist collectives in Bushwick, in Sunset Park, and different other ethnic neighborhoods throughout the city. We also were able to connect with different multi-generational businesses and really ask them why they chose to come back to Chinatown. This was in San Francisco. We got to learn and listen to elders who were taking us on tours of their version of Chinatown. I feel like it was 10 days of a whirlwind tour, 2 days in each city, talking to as many people as we could, connecting and building with as many organizations as we could. And Diane and I are still debriefing all of our takeaways from that trip, and also thinking about the ways in which we can present and engage our community here and our findings and the themes that stood out to us throughout the tour. So where does that leave us now? So WOW, we are a shop. We're a 92-year-old porcelain shop. We're the oldest store in Chinatown. And I think right now what we're trying to figure out is how can we meld both the W.O.W Project, the work that we do, with the community initiative with our business. And what does it look like as a model? Is it a social enterprise? Is it a nonprofit that exists under a business? Is it just a community initiative? We want to continue to bring people into our space, to be in dialogue, to share their stories. We want to celebrate Asian American artists and makers and be able to collaborate on creating the products that we sell in our shop. We want to also tell the stories and the histories that these objects hold, because porcelain designs and the patterns that we sell in the shop hold so much cultural knowledge. And we want to continue to innovate, designing our own products and looking at ways in which we can connect back our work with the W.O.W Project with WOW and say, hey, come buy a collection, our own collection of porcelain, and 10% of those proceeds go to the W.O.W Project. And that person who walks into the shop knows exactly where their money is going. So I wanted to end with a quote from one of my role models, Grace Lee Boggs, who is a philosopher, an activist, a feminist, and she once said, "The most radical thing I ever did was stay put." And I feel like this resonates with me a lot, and I'm excited to see how this radical act of staying in New York City's Chinatown can lead to a movement in my community. Thank you so much.
Thanks for coming. I have a lot of questions, but I wanted to ask you about to talk more about how you guys use social media, because that was actually how I discovered the W.O.W Project, and I've always been really impressed by how accessible it is through social media.
That's great. It's good.
How do you do it all, but also what is the goal and how do you think about it?
Yeah, I think we kind of started as I was showing some slides of us cleaning out the shop in the basement. I started to find some gems in the store and really wanted a space to share them, and started using social media as a means to do that. But I think for us, the shop and the W.O.W Project needs a lot of storytelling alongside it, and needs an education piece for the people that engage with our social media. So we've been using it as an education tool to not only tell our story of how we started the W.O.W Project, but also to talk about where our products come from, why did we choose that, who did we buy it from, and also, all the stuff that we're doing around the W.O.W Project too. There's so many things to explain, and social media has been really great to use as a platform for that.
Thank you. I'm super inspired. As our students go out into the world and often are invited to participate in exhibitions in gentrifying neighborhoods, what would you like to see their role be in engaging those galleries in places like Harlem or Chinatown or Bed-Stuy, or in other cities, in engaging those galleries? I'm not really asking for advice, but more like what would your hope be in terms of how we, pursue our own goals and act in solidarity so that we're part of the solution and not part of the problem?
Yeah, that's a really good question. I don't know if there's one answer, and I think it depends on a case-by-case basis, but I would hope that people do their research before they show at a space, to know who showed there before, to know the history of that space, who's the landlord, and also to ask and see amongst the people who are in the show, is there anybody from that neighborhood that's a part of the show? An artist reached out to me who was showing in a space below Canal Street on Broadway, and he just moved to New York. He's from San Francisco, and was really concerned about being an outsider coming into Chinatown. So he did his research and looked up different community organizations within the neighborhood, and he found the W.O.W Project and reached out to me. And the first time he was meeting me and in conversation with me said, I really want to donate 10% of my proceeds to the W.O.W Project. I want to make sure that I'm not just showing here and not contributing, and this is the way that I want to contribute. Not to say that everyone is able to donate money, but a way in which you can share the platform with folks who are doing the work in the neighborhood and for and by the community, I think would be a really beautiful way to join forces with folks who are in Chinatown, Harlem, Lower East Side.
Thank you very much for your presentation. As you were talking, I came across a couple ideas, but I'll just share one. If gentrification is just an opportunity for inclusion and for other people to come into the community, what would you say are some of the negative effects of gentrification?
Yeah, I'd like to turn that question on the audience. What do you think are the negative effects of gentrification? I mentioned some of them in the presentation. Yeah. Yeah, rents rising. With rents rising, long-time residents being displaced. So that's one. Anyone else? Mm-hmm. Yeah, the erasure of culture. I think for that, I think hand in hand is the shuttering of small businesses, because that's where a lot of culture and history is held in a community. Anyone else?
Would you say that people that do not reflect the community also come into that community and take over?
In ways. Mm-hmm. Anybody else have ideas about negative effects?
Is there a way to reach out to these artists and galleries in order to work together? Because you're doing a great job informing your community about what's going on, but it would be great if you know, some sort of interaction could be done with these institutions. So I'm just wondering if you tried that or if you did it.
Yeah, I think for us, the heart of what we do is really creating a space for a community. If an artist reaches out to me and is looking to collaborate, I'm definitely open to be in conversation. But it's hard to challenge an institution's agenda and strategic plan and say, hey, I started this community initiative. Do you want to like sign on to my agenda and collaborate with me? That's definitely a lot of work to get somebody to sign on. But for me, like if there are ways in which I can work with the Museum of Chinese America, I know that's on deck for them in their programming, I'll reach out and say, hey, I have this going on. It looks like we have synergy. We can work together. And I think those commonalities are ways in which we can collaborate in terms of like getting them fully on board with my mission. I'm a little skeptical as to how productive that would be for me in terms of energy and creating space for my community, because that's number one for me.
So switching that question around, what are the positive points of gentrification and how you can use them like in a positive way? I mean, I know that we saw a lot, but like talking more about like gentrification by itself, like there's positive aspects in it, right? But like how can you use that in a good way, you know, because the world is about collaboration. It's not about separation, because, you know, we can't live separate, but then comes gentrification and everything gets mixed up, but everything gets fucked up. Sorry for the word. But so like what would be the positive aspects of gentrification that you can use them in your favor?
That's a good question. Can I get a poll from the audience or some? I'm just interested. I want this to be a conversation more than anything than just me answering everything. So I'm just interested to hear, what do you guys think are positive effects of gentrification? Yeah.
I don't think the displacement of people is ever positive.
Yeah.
But the gentrification doesn't mean that. Maybe I don't know the term in English, so that's why.
Yeah. So for me, when I think about gentrification, I really link it directly to displacement. And it's not a natural process. You can name all the players that are moving this engine and this ecosystem. So for me, I don't really see it as a positive thing, to be honest. It's hard for me to find the positive. Mm-hmm.
Something that happened in Mexico.
Yeah.
In some communities in Chiapas, a really, really poor place, the government came in a lot of negative aspects, but in a positive aspects, a lot of medicines came in and they started curing a lot of people. And that's something to do with gentrification, or gentrification is only a term to like get people out of it, or is it as well like
I would have to know
money?
more about the situation, and I think a lot of the times there's great things, right? Like solely seen as just like, okay, there's a new subway station that opened up that's opening up in San Francisco's Chinatown. That is a great thing. But they're also displacing folks by making that subway station. So you can't have one without the other. So I don't really see it as, this amazing thing without also the other side of the coin.
Yeah, that's what just like the point that I wanted to get to. Like, what would be like the positive things?
Anybody else with ideas or thoughts about positive effects of gentrification? Just interested to hear. Yeah, all the way in the back in the corner. I saw you. Or okay, sorry.
Actually, I can't think that there is a lot of positive effects of gentrification, because I'm from South Korea. I'm from like Seoul.
Mm-hmm.
It's a huge city, and gentrification is not really huge issue in Korea, because we used to have like unique small local communities in some parts of the cities, but then it attracted people, and then there are a lot of crowds just came to the places, and then the rent was going on, and some other franchises just like take up all the space, and then it just demolished the local community or like unique the culture that they had.
Right.
So, and finally, so it lost its attraction, and finally, so the shops, even the franchise shop, didn't make money from the space, but rent is so high, so nobody wants to come in, but it's, so it's now just empty places. There are so many empty shops, but the rent is really high, but nobody wants to come in. So it just like swipe out the streets in the parts of cities. So actually, I don't think there is any other positive effect of gentrification.
Yeah, thanks for sharing that.
This is, I guess, more just a statement, but thank you. Thank you so much for this project and everything that you're doing. I think this is exactly how art should be coming into these communities, rooted in the communities. I just want to impress upon everyone in this room, including myself. I live in Brooklyn. I'm from Oklahoma. This is not my neighborhood. All of us, as artists, are the foot soldiers of gentrification. we are often the first thing that comes in and starts displacing people. And that's something we all need to be aware of when we go into those communities, and making sure that when we do, if we do, we are doing it as sensitively as possible and trying to actually be a part of it.
Yeah, definitely. I think, yes, there is, like, it's good to acknowledge that, but also to I'm always thinking about action and ways that you can, like, have a very passionate emotion, but how can you act on that and contribute? So, I mean, if you do live in Brooklyn and you're aware that you are coming in as a newcomer, like, think about the ways in which you can get active. Like, can you link up with a community organization and volunteer there? Like, I think, you know, just because you're a newcomer doesn't mean you're a gentrifier and that's it. There's ways in which you can engage, and people are receptive. It's not like they're all standoffish, you know? So I would encourage to also, be active in your communities and look at who's doing the work. Who's doing the work in Brooklyn? There's so many great organizations in different parts of Brooklyn, so.
Very interesting talk. I have very old, fond memories growing up in Chicago of going down during Chinese New Year to what's a very small Chinatown in Chicago. And then also first moving to New York and coming to Chinatown, going to the movie theaters, which are not open anymore. More problematic point. When we're using the term gentrification, at least in my mind, I see men in business suits that are real estate developers. However, I've lived in New York long enough to know that some of the fringes of Chinatown are actually Little Italy, another immigrant group, which, and I know there's some fringes along it that it's rather problematic for me, trying to make sense of that. I remember reading an article in the Village Voice about a bit of a clash, that the Italians were feeling displaced because Chinatown was moving north of certain streets. And I'm wondering if you would comment on that. Does gentrification apply to other cultural groups?
I think yes,
Okay.
definitely. I mean, everyone brought it up that it's happening all over the city. This is not unique to New York City's Chinatown. This is not unique to Chinatowns. This is happening in different ethnic neighborhoods throughout the city. So I'm not, in this presentation, I am not owning gentrification as a term that Chinatown, New York City owns, you know? So I definitely hear that. That is part of the history. Yeah, that's all.
One way to prevent gentrification is to somehow keep the people there. And I guess getting the groups together in your shop, holding the workshops, holding the events there would do that.
I think kind of a bigger picture thing is gentrification isn't really about the acts of businesses coming in. It's about the long-term effects of these, as I don't know who it was, talking about the small neighborhoods in South Korea and Seoul. Once the businesses come in, when they start failing, they have the luxury of leaving. Whereas, as you're saying, the W.O.W Project, your grandparents, your great-grandparents, they've been there for ever, you know, and that's where their culture is. They want to stay. They don't have the luxury of just moving out and finding some other place to settle down that's their home. So I think that's the conversation that needs to be talked about, how artists can bring their own flavor, but also help in the long term to develop the community in the same way that your grandparents and your family has for Chinatown.
Yeah, definitely. I think it's too often than not that we see a lot of artists coming in, doing a project, leaving, and then there's no interaction at all. There's no relationship building there. Yeah, and I'd encourage everybody to, if they're working in a community, to relationship build and to really be committed to being a part of that community and playing a role instead of just getting a job done, painting a mural, what have you.
Thank you for your talk. I wanted to congratulate you on, I think it's amazing work that you're doing. I used to live, or I live in Singapore in what was the first public housing in Singapore, sort of Art Deco style and all that. And the government has sort of threatened to tear it down. And anyway, then gentrification happened, and galleries and cafes, too many for a little neighborhood. So I completely understand sort of what you're trying to do. I think my question is that what is, as it is where you've progressed, what is your biggest challenge going forward? I think it's a wonderful sort of adaptive reuse of a space that has so much cultural history. What do you see are your biggest challenges, and how can people help?
I have a lot of challenges. I just told you about the good things. I mean, first of all, I've never run a business before, so that's like a new thing for me and a challenge of just learning as I go and being okay with making mistakes and being flexible. I mentioned before working in an intergenerational space where, my grandmother has set the foundation for this shop, and I don't want to, I want to honor what she's done and not completely flip it over into a different thing. So that's like a very, that's like a dance, a very delicate dance that I've been trying to learn over the past year and a half. Another one is wearing different hats in my community, being a small business owner, being a resident, also having my family being small property owners, owning the building. I have to figure out how to navigate those different roles in different spaces. And I've been more active in the community, attending the block association meetings, attending community board meetings, because all my work goes hand in hand with that. But it's a lot of time. It's also like lots of politics, interpersonal dynamics, and those things I've never really confronted before. So yeah, everything is a challenge. But I mean, it's a learning experience, and I think, as you could see, like the work that we do and the impact is worth it in the end. And yeah, it's all a process. Mm-hmm.
Do you have any volunteer opportunities coming up? Do you need silk screeners or people to help with events coming up?
Thanks, Allison, for the opportunity to plug. I'm always looking for volunteers to help out with like different projects, and I usually meet with the volunteer that's interested to see what is the best fit. So yeah, if you're interested, you can come after. I'll give you my email. Allison can give you my email as well. I'm a one-woman show. I also have interns. I have some volunteers. I mean, my family helps me a ton, but it's always nice to have extra hands.
Part of me is jealous that you have such deep roots in a community. 3 out of my 4 grandparents are immigrants, and the 4th is first generation. But since they've been in the States, they've never really put down roots in a community that, of like people with a similar heritage. I think that happens a lot, like some people end up in Little Italy and others end up, in some nameless, very, diverse and integrated community that's sort of like the old idea of American dream of melting pot, I guess, but your heritage kind of gets erased. Mm-hmm. So it's just wonderful that you had this opportunity to honor your heritage. One thing I noticed was that, like a lot of other people nowadays, use the term elders as opposed to the elderly, right? Like the elderly has this, sweep them out of the way kind of connotation, whereas elders, means let's engage in respect, and that's really awesome. But on this question of the positive and negative effects of gentrification, there are lots of positive effects of gentrification, but not usually for the people who live in the gentrifying neighborhoods, right?
Mm-hmm.
So there's positive effects for real estate investors and developers. There's positive effects for new business owners, and they tend to be owned by large corporations that don't have a connection to a community. There's benefits for the new populations that move in, artists and hipsters, and then families like you see in Williamsburg. So then there's cafes with really good espresso and Wi-Fi, and you can get dry cleaning done in a way you couldn't 10 years earlier. But those things don't tend to benefit people that have lived in those places for generations.
Exactly.
I think there are very few identifiable benefits for people of limited means and privilege who live in gentrifying neighborhoods before they gentrify.
Yeah,
so it's really an unequal distribution of benefits, which is why there's this, international movement as cities grow and populations are urbanizing to resist gentrification, and that you're so not alone. I mean, you have so much in common with people in Los Angeles and Chicago and San Francisco and Detroit and all these other places, and the language you use and your strategies are part of really a movement. So I guess I'm just sort of like, giving you a big shout out. I think it's really awesome. Did you have something to add? You can maybe close it out.
Yeah, concerning the positive and negative effects. I'm from Colombia, from Bogota. There's a neighborhood there that it's a very traditional and popular neighborhood that for the past 25 or 30 years got sort of invaded by prostitution and the use of drugs, and it became a very dangerous place for the residents of this neighborhood and people who were visiting. And 5 years ago, a number of actors in the artist world started opening up spaces there and started changing like the whole fauna of the neighborhood, and it started displacing, of course, the drug users and the prostitution, and brought a game culture to the space, to the neighborhood, and sort of created this good living conditions again. So I would believe that it's obviously a case-to-case scenario, but also in terms of how art and artists, by inserting themselves into a certain community, might create a displacement that is not good. It might also bring forth good change in the fact that they're bringing culture again. And I think that in that case, with the W.O.W Project, the way you're using it and presenting it is precisely along those lines, where working with cultural producers and artists alongside might revitalize the space. So I do believe in certain situations there is a positive.
Yeah, I think it goes back to what Mark was saying about who does it benefit, like who is it for? I think that's always the big question, because through different perspectives you could say it's good in this way, like Mark was saying, it's good for the family that just moved into this neighborhood to have this cafe, to have this fancy restaurant. So it really, like you were saying, it just depends on the situation, the neighborhood, and the people